One of two things has happened. Either you have just started at a new church and you have inherited a worship team, and some of the team members who are on that worship team should not be on that worship team, and they should have never been on the team in the first place, and now you don't know what to do. Or you have decided to implement some new expectations for your current worship team, and you realize that those new expectations actually disqualify some people from your current worship team, and now you are stuck in limbo where you have these people who are already on the worship team and you don't know what to do with them. They shouldn't be on the worship team either because they have a bad attitude, or because they aren't very good musically, or they're unbelievers and you've come to realize that unbelievers shouldn't be on the worship team at your church, or these people are not living up to the moral standards that you expect from leaders in your church. What do you do now? They're already on your team. Do you just say, sayonara, see you later? Sorry it didn't work out? Well, I think there's actually a better way to go about it, more of a step-by-step process. The steps may be more abbreviated if it's a more serious problem on your team, but a step-by-step process nonetheless that will allow you to gracefully work with people on your team, not for the sake of kicking them off your team, because that's not the ultimate goal. We want to restore them to the fellowship of our team. And ultimately, the goal is to help them see the way that they should act on the team, not just to kick them off the team. Although sometimes it may end up with that last piece, but that's not where we want to start. So, where do we start? Well, if you have inherited a bad worship team member, I'll use that as the umbrella term for everything that I just previously talked about. If you have inherited a bad worship team member, the first thing that you must do is you must have clear expectations stated for your worship team. Because how are you going to hold people to a standard of being on the team if they don't even know what that standard is and you've never told them what the standard is? They have never committed to a standard, and so it's sort of unfair to just go up to them and be like, hey, you know what? You're not doing this stuff. And they're like, well, I didn't know that I needed to do that stuff. You've got to communicate your expectations up front. So how do you do that? You got to put together some sort of, and you can call it whatever you want, but some sort of worship team code of conduct. If that sounds too intimidating, you can call it a worship ministry overview or vision packet. I don't know, I'm just coming up with random, less intimidating names. But essentially, it is a document that allows you to state your expectations. And if you don't have that and you have no idea what that looks like, then check out, linked down in the description below, the worship team toolkit that I put together. It's completely free. I'll send it to you. You can pretty much copy and paste it right into your worship ministry. But in that, you will see the code of conduct. I call it the worship ministry overview at my church. But you will see that document that I use at my church, and you can use that. It's pretty much all done for you, but you can use that as the basis for your own worship ministry. So you've got to implement this first, because we need expectations to hold our people to. And in those expectations, as you'll see in the worship team toolkit that I'll send you, you will see that there are explicit musical expectations, which is one of the problems people often ask me about. They're having on their team somebody who shouldn't be on their team because they aren't skilled enough musically, or moral expectations, so that people know what expectations they need to live up to as leaders in the church. And the reason that we do this is we don't just introduce it to our team in response to something bad happening in our team. That's not the foremost reason that we do it. We do it because we just need this to have a healthy worship ministry. And so I say that because I don't just want you to implement this into your team and then say, you know, this is what we expect people to live up to, and then say, I kind of just secretly did this because I wanted to point out the one thing in here where somebody wasn't living up to it, and then I can point to them and say, you know what, you aren't doing this, so you can't sign this, and you shouldn't be on the team anymore. Now, if it's some sort of moral failure that you think should remove them from some leadership position in your church, then obviously we can have those conversations. But if it's more of a musical side of thing, I'm going to give you a more progressive approach where it progresses over time. And it's not just you're no longer on the team. So far we have created this worship team code of conduct that's got moral expectations and musical expectations. And maybe you're like, yeah, now I know that that's the part that I'm stuck with. I have these expectations, but I've got the bad worship team member on my team. So here's what you actually do now that you have the foundation in place. The first thing that you do is, once you introduce that to the people on your team, that counts as your first time communicating it to people. So the hope And I'm not saying that it's going to work out this way, but the hope is that as you intentionally implement that new understanding of what it means to be on the worship team into your worship ministry, that people see that and they conform to it. Now, this is why it can't just be arbitrary rules that you set up. You have to actually lead people through this process, and it's going to take time. So if there are specific logistical expectations that you've never done before, then you've got to have grace with people, because we've got to give people time to adjust to the new way of doing things, and we have to shepherd them through the process. I always use the example of memorizing your music. Let's say you wanted your team to memorize their music. You wouldn't just say, hey, we've got this worship team code of conduct, and it says now that we're going to memorize our music, so this Sunday you're going to have your music memorized. Shepherding people through that process would look like walking alongside them and saying, hey guys, this is why we're going to memorize our music. I think it would give us these benefits, which you've got to tell people the why, not just we're going to do this because I said so, but give them the why, tell them the benefits of what it will do for their worship leading and how it will help better lead your church on Sundays. And then progressively work through that process with them and say, we're going to try this at practice. Let's just give it a shot and see how we do. I'm going to pick one of our best known songs. We've done this song for the past 5 years. If we have any shot at memorizing music, it's going to be this song. So let's just give it a shot and see how it goes. And then you slowly ramp up over time. I won't go through the whole process in this video for that, but you got to do it progressively if it is a logistical expectation. Now, after you have communicated it once, and when I say once, I mean through the document that you give them, but hopefully over and over again, progressively over the next several months, so that they actually understand the code of conduct and that vision becomes their vision, because you've got to have buy-in from your team for some of those things. I mean, some things are just expectations we have to have for members on our team, but if you're making a big change like memorizing your music or something, that's not like a make or break situation in your worship ministry. So be progressive about that. Once you have communicated it over 2 or 3 months, and now you are sure that people actually understand what it means, they don't have to accept it yet, but they understand why you're doing it, then once you start seeing problems in your worship ministry, which hopefully you just bring people, the whole team, along on the ride, including the bad inherited worship team member, you bring them along on the ride. And now they're with you and the rest of the team, and they change. But if that doesn't happen, after a few months, you've got to address them personally. You've got to walk up to them one-on-one, and we don't do it in front of other people, obviously, but you have to actually bring your concern to the person. We've got this general expectation for the team, but sometimes people need to hear that general expectation for the team actually applies to them too. And so let's talk about a couple different situations. Let's say somebody was late to practice. They're habitually late to practice. This makes them a bad worship team member, and you have inherited them, and they always show up late to practice. This is when you go to them and talk to them and say, hey, I noticed that you always show up like 15 minutes late to rehearsal. Is there a problem with the rehearsal time? Is there something else going on? And you seek to understand their position, like why are they always late? Is it something in their schedule where they can't make it work? And maybe that helps you be more gracious to them. I think sometimes we forget that, and we're just like, worship rehearsal starts at 6 o'clock, and I'm like, yeah, I want all my worship team members to be here right at 6, but if there's something else going on in their lives, then I'm going to be gracious to them. And maybe the grace is, maybe in this season of life right now, because you've got this other thing going on, it doesn't work for you to be on the worship team for this season, because our worship team members need to be at rehearsal so they know what they're doing for Sunday. And if you can't be at worship rehearsal, whether it's your fault or not your fault, whether you're just being lazy or you've legitimately got something else going on in your lives, we have to prioritize things in our lives all the time. So if you can't be here on time, maybe it's best for you to step away for this season, because our worship team members need to be here at rehearsal on time. But my point is, you got to talk to them person to person, one-on-one, and actually bring your concerns to them, because it's not fair to them or to you to just let your thoughts marinate and fester and your bitterness grows. The way to get rid of bitterness is actually to go and talk to the person that you have a problem with. So ask them, can I talk to you after worship rehearsal or sometime during the week, whenever it is? I had a couple things I wanted to talk to you about, and then bring it up to them. And I know that this part isn't easy, and people are like, I don't know what to do with bad worship team members that I've inherited, not because they don't know what to do, but because they don't want to go through this process, I think, sometimes. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but it is the thing that you have to do. You have to point out the thing that is wrong to the person so that they have a chance to fix it. And so maybe they're late to rehearsal. That's like a logistical thing. Let's talk about a moral problem where there is some egregious moral compromise in their lives or something, right? Then you go to them as a brother or sister in Christ and say, hey, I'm seeing this in your life, and I'm concerned about it. Like I'm concerned for you because it seems like you've given into this sin in your life, and I don't want that for you. I want what's best for you, and come from it from that angle, and then it'll probably come up at some point in the conversation, for the time being. Like if they are unrepentant of the sin, then you got to say, for the time being, I'm not sure that you can continue to serve on the worship team, because these are the expectations that we have for worship team members. And we think that worship team members are leaders in the church because they're up in front of our church on a Sunday morning. They represent the church on a Sunday morning. And so we've got to live up to these expectations as leaders, but also just as members in the church. And once again, that's not an easy conversation, but that's the conversation that needs to be had. So once we have that initial conversation with them about whatever the problem is, whether it is a logistical problem, not showing up to rehearsal, not having their parts learned, whatever it is, or singing bad harmony or something like that, if they aren't a good singer, then we give them a chance to make progress on that because they didn't even know that it was a problem. Especially if you've inherited a bad team member. Think about, they've been on the team for 3 years and nobody told them that they aren't a very good singer. So they weren't even trying to fix it. And I know you're thinking, yeah, they should have known though. They're like really bad. It's like, okay, well, they obviously didn't, or else they would have tried to fix it. So give them a chance to fix it, point them to some helpful resources, and then give them the chance to make progress on what you pointed out to them. Imagine if somebody came up to you and just said, you know what, you're not very good at music. You should just not be on the worship team anymore. You wouldn't be very happy about that, right? That would be frustrating for you. So put yourself in the other person's shoes and give them a chance to improve. Walk alongside them. That's what we're supposed to do as leaders in the church. We walk alongside people spiritually, but also in terms of music ministry, walk alongside them musically and help them grow in their gifting. And that doesn't mean that you have to like walk hand in hand with them the whole time, but point them in the right direction, give them some resources and say, these are the things that I would love for you to work on. And then give them a chance to make progress. See how we're doing this progressively? We didn't just kick them off the team all of a sudden, but you may actually win their affection for you. I'm not sure how to put it. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but you might actually win them to yourself in the way that you lead them through improving or showing up to rehearsal on time, or whatever it is. So if it's musical, then do that. If it's a bad attitude, bring up the bad attitude to them and say, these are the things that I'm seeing. And it's not like an immediate dismissal from the team because it's not some egregious moral failure, but it is a problem. And so I need to address it and say, you know what, I see you arguing with this other person on the team, and you probably need to have the conversation with the other person on the team as well. I see you guys arguing, and we just really need to figure that out because we can't continue in arguing with each other because that's not going to work. Whatever the situation is, bring it to the person's attention and then give them a chance to progress and improve upon it. And if it comes to a bad attitude or something like that, be quick to point it out the second time. Don't let it fester. Once you see it again, pull that person aside and say, we had a talk yesterday, whatever it is, and I saw it again at worship rehearsal this week. And that's what I'm talking about. When you said this and did this, that's what I'm seeing, and that's what makes me uncomfortable and is not healthy for our team. So be quick to point it out then the second time, and don't just think, well, they're going to figure it out. No, say like, this is an example of exactly what I was talking about. And then finally, once you give them a chance to progress, and if they're like legitimately making an effort to improve, I wouldn't just automatically kick them off the team. Now, if it's musically and it's a distraction to the whole church on Sunday, I might have them sit out a couple Sundays and say, this is actually serious enough where we need to sit and work on this for a little while until we get a place where it's not distracting for people in worship. But give them a chance to progress. And if they are like really working on it, and if you have a relationship with the people on your team, you'll know if they are really working on it or not. But if they're really working on it, then just allow them to continue to progress and follow up with them through the process until they get to the point where you think that they need to be to continue to serve on the worship team. Now, if somebody is just like, you know what, I don't care. I don't care about that. I'm not going to even try to do that. Then you need to have the hard conversation and say, this is why we put this at the front of the video. These are the expectations for members on the worship team. You aren't even trying to live up to that. You aren't trying to get here on time, and there's nothing preventing you in your schedule. You aren't even trying to get along with the other people on the team because of these things, because you aren't living up to the expectations. And I've clearly communicated them, and then I came to you personally and pointed out what I felt like wasn't being matched up with in the code of conduct. And then we talked about it again and again. Because of these things, I can't continue to schedule you to serve on Sunday. And once again, not an easy conversation, but I think so often it's not that people don't know what to do with an inherited bad team member. It's that they do know what to do, but they don't want to do it. So that's the process I would go through. And if you need help with that very first piece, which is integral to the process because we have to clearly state our expectations. If you need help with that, check out the Worship Team Toolkit. I'll link it down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.